going to talk a little bit about the forgotten goddesses of the game, women and baseball. Now, women were considered too refined for the game. Baseball was considered far too violent a sport for young ladies, and the presence of women was thought to purify the game. Create a type of moral presence or atmosphere that would keep the men on their best behavior or on their toes. At this point in time, the middle 19th century, men versus women, the thought of men competing against women is strictly verboten. It would be considered sinful, a spectacle of immorality and impropriety. Now, women formed their own baseball clubs circa the mid-1860s. In colleges, the struggle for equality becomes the struggle to play baseball. Vassar women college teams, they create the Laurel and Abernakes baseball clubs circa 1866. Now, these women who are courageous enough to play the sport at this point in time are basically wearing uniforms that are, to say the least, a fetishist delight. They are very cumbersome. They feature long-sleeve shirts, frilled high necklines, wide floor-length skirts, and high-button shoes, and, of course, layers and layers of undergarments. Now, how they manage to play in this cumbersome clothing is beyond me, but play they do. The team is known as the Vassar Resolutes, and eventually they're disbanded due to complaints from the mothers of the young ladies playing baseball. But Smith College takes up the mantle when Vassar decides to close up shop. Now, male promoters, circa 1875, form and charge admission. There's money to be made, and the women players are considered novelty acts. Examples of this would be the Springfield Blondes and Brunettes, and there's an element of farce involved in these games, but these women are still pioneers, and as the Native Americans did, they slowly gained the respect of the crowd. Now, these women, these male promoters, and these female teams go on barnstorming tours. They travel to nearby states across the country and challenge men's teams. They're playing men for money, and they travel all across the country doing this. This is known as the era of the Bloomer Girls. This is from around 1880 to about 1920. These Bloomer Girls play public, exciting baseball games. An example of this would be the Boston Bloomers. As I mentioned, there's a fetish element to the games here. They are, after all, women, and men enjoy watching the females play the sport. Now, they play interesting scientific games that it's a combination of agility, speed, and I do mention those yummy curves. All right, so the women, this barnstorming circus-like atmosphere goes on for decades, but there's no women's league at this point in time. And I also want to mention that the overwhelming majority of women who play ball during this point in time, the turn of the century, are working class or farm girls who see the sport as a ticket out of their poverty. Now, something I want to ask here at this point in time is why baseball scholars and historians seldom, if ever, mention this fact that women are involved in the game almost from the very beginning. Now, I want to get into some of those forgotten goddesses of the game. The first one I want to mention is Maud Nelson. Now, Maud Nelson was perhaps the most renowned of the Bloomer Girls. Sadly, even though she dominates the sport for 4 decades, is a forgotten legend and a very obscure figure. A lot of baseball historians, scholars do not know who this woman, Maud Nelson, is. Now, she was a pitcher, a third baseman, she was a scout, she was a manager, and she was an owner. Now, she played for the Boston Bloomers and the Star Bloomers, and she was a very skillful hitter. Now, she creates her own team. This is around 1911. known as the Western Bloomers or the All-Star Bloomers. And they go on the barnstorming tours. They travel. Basically, she spends a lifetime traveling under a variety of assumed names. She's known as Maud Britta, Maud Nielsen, Maud Olson, and Maud Delacroix. Now, she dominates the sport from around 1895 to about 1935. And when the Depression hits, she basically retires because there's a shift from women playing hardball to softball. Now, another lady I'd like to mention, another forgotten goddess of the game, is Lizzie Arlington Stroud. Now, Miss Stroud was the first woman signed by a minor league. This is circa 1898. Now, she's unique in baseball history because she is a skilled pitcher, a female pitcher who pitched in a men's league. Sadly, she is also an obscure figure, and very little is known about her. Now, this woman pitching in a men's league is considered something of a novelty. She does this for the Philadelphia Reserves, but eventually she's let go, and she becomes one of the great Bloomer girls who plays for years and then simply vanishes into obscurity. No one seems to know what happened to Miss Lizzie Arlington Stroud. She is, in fact, a very obscure figure, rarely if ever mentioned by baseball scholars or historians. Now, I want to go on to Amanda Harriet Clement. She's the first woman umpire or judge. This is circa 1904. Now, she's officiating in a male league. She's judging male players. This is during the Renville-Howerton game, I believe, in Ohio, circa 1904. She works as an umpire, judging men's leagues for about 6 or 7 years. She's known as the Lady in Blue, and she's a very tough ump. She curses, she shouts, she waves her arms, and she ejects a lot of players. Now, with this money she makes as an umpire, now remember, a lot of these players are farm girls and working class people, and they have very little money, and they go into the sport as a ticket out of their poverty. Well, Miss Clement puts herself through college with the money she earns as an umpire, and she becomes a coach for a prestigious college. She's actually a natural born athlete along the lines of Jim Thorpe. She plays basketball, she plays tennis, she's into running and track and field. Well, she becomes a coach for a women's basketball team, and she becomes a pioneer in the sport of basketball as well as baseball. So it's quite an interesting character, Miss Clement. And I also want to mention on Alta Weiss. Now, Alta Weiss is known as the Girl Wonder. This is circa 1907. She is said to be an amazing pitcher, perhaps one of the best pitchers who ever lived, male or female. Now, she played for the Vermilion Independents. She has a smoking fastball and a curve, and she draws very big crowds. Now, she joins the Weiss, she starts the Weiss All-Stars around 1908 and goes on a barnstorming tour. She's a great pitcher, but not a good hitter. She quits the game circa 1911 and becomes a pioneer in an entirely different area. She becomes a medical doctor. She is, in fact, the only female graduating in her class. Wow. All these women are quite amazing. They break gender restrictions. They earn money themselves instead of getting husbands or boyfriends to earn it for them. And more importantly, they're great at the game. They're skillful players. And now these ladies prove, at least in my eyes, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that women should be allowed to play the sport alongside men. Now, there's certainly an argument for restricting women from playing in certain sports. For example, the thought of men and women competing in football, well, that will just lead to many, many injuries all around. But there is absolutely no reason why a woman cannot compete in the major leagues alongside her male compatriots. No reason whatsoever. While certainly power is a factor in baseball, power hitters, for example, skill is a more important factor, and I think the point in time has been reached when women should be allowed to play in the major leagues. Now, also, you historians and baseball scholars out there, you need to start writing and reading more about these Native American players and more about these women players who were pioneers and broke racial and gender restrictions by playing the game of baseball. Baseball, the struggle for baseball, to play baseball, is in fact the struggle for equality, and that spiritual element, that struggle, has always been there. Now, before I depart, I want to talk just a moment or two